Hello, I'm David Stephen Cohen. I grew up in the 1940s and 50s as a Jewish American in New Jersey. Back then, we were all Zionists, as Israel was founded for Jewish refugees after the Holocaust. My mother was a lifelong member of Hadassah, the Jewish Women's Zionist organization. My family bought trees to be planted in Israel. After my bar mitzvah, I actually wanted to become a rabbi. Instead, I became a historian. During that time, we considered ourselves liberals before it became a dirty word, and Jews marched alongside African Americans during the Civil Rights Movement. This all changed for me in 1967, when after the Six-Day War, Israel annexed the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, parts of the Golan Heights, and all of Jerusalem. The meaning of the biblical references to the chosen people and the promised land, and the closing prayer of the Passover service next year in Jerusalem have taken on a different meaning from the symbolism of the escape from slavery to freedom. I am no longer a Zionist. Israel is not the Jewish state for me. I am not an Israeli. I consider myself to be an American who is Jewish, and I think that President Joseph Biden is misguided in his Middle East foreign policy. On October 7, 2023, Hamas fighters of the elite forces of the Izzadin al-Qassam Brigade crashed through a barrier separating the Gaza Strip from southern Israel and attacked a police station, 3 kibbutzim, communal farms, the Supernova Music Festival, and an Israeli grandmother in her home. Israeli officials said that approximately 1,200 Israeli, American, and French citizens, some with dual citizenship, were killed, including the elderly, women, children, and babies, and about 239 taken captive in that one day. At least one young Israeli woman was brutally gang raped and then shot in the head. The same day, the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, called up reserves, and the Israeli Air Force began attacking Gaza. Citing Israel's right to defend itself, U.S. President Joe Biden called the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to express the solid and unwavering support for Israel. The next day, Israel formally declared a state of war against Hamas, with the stated aim of destroying Hamas's military capabilities and ending its rule over Gaza. On September 12th, Israel announced that it was cutting off water, fuel, and electricity to Gaza, affecting about 2 million Palestinian civilians living there. Fearing a full-scale Israeli invasion, Palestinians began fleeing south to a supposed safe zone. However, the only border crossing to Egypt at Rafah remained closed. The result of the Israeli invasion was the death of more than 30,000, mostly women and children, and mass starvation. Israel claimed that Hamas was using civilians as shields against the Israeli attack. The Iranian-backed Shi'ite group Hezbollah in Lebanon on October 11th began firing precision missiles into northern Israel. Israel responded by firing missiles into southern Lebanon and increasing its force on the Israeli-Lebanese border as the threat of a two-front war seemed possible. Israeli settlers in the West Bank began attacking innocent Palestinians. It should be known that Israeli settlers on the West Bank are allowed to carry weapons, but not the Palestinians there. The first shipment of advanced weaponry from the United States arrived in Israel on October 10th, and the Iranian-backed Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi in Yemen announced that any intervention by the United States in the region would result in a Houthi response. The United States deployed 2 carrier strike groups to the region, the USS Gerald Ford into the eastern Mediterranean, and the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower to the Red Sea. The stated purpose of the deployment was to prevent the war from escalating by involving in Iran. The result has been the opposite, creating the direct confrontation between the Houthi and American forces as the Houthi attack shipping in the Red Sea. In effect, the United States is now providing military action in support of Israel. Protests erupted in Ramallah and Hebron on the West Bank and elsewhere around the world. In the United States, there were protests in various cities and on college campuses, which were often met by counter-protesters. 34 Harvard University students signed a statement by the Palestinian Solidarity Committee blaming Israel alone for the massacre of the Jewish residents on October 7th. In response, Jewish hedge fund manager Bill Ackman and several other business leaders demanded that Harvard release the names of the students whose organizations signed the statements so that they could be blacklisted. Ronald Lauder of the Estee Lauder Companies and president of the World Jewish Congress, at a meeting of the Conservative Heritage Foundation, threatened to halt his contributions to the University of Pennsylvania for hosting a Palestine Writers Literature Festival. Lauder said that he and other donors, quote, can no longer be silent, unquote, and that newspapers, universities, and cable channels had to understand, quote, there are consequences for their actions, unquote. Lauder's notion is that to be opposed to Israel as the Jewish state makes one an anti-Semite. Certainly there has been a spike in anti-Semitism as opposed to anti-Zionism, as well as Islamophobia since the outbreak of the Israeli-Hamas war, both in Europe and America. On December 5th, 2023, 3 Ivy League university presidents, Liz McGill of my alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, Claudine Gay of Harvard, and Sally Kornbluth of MIT, were called to testify before the House Committee on Education about alleged incidents of anti-Semitism on their campuses. Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York asked President McGill, quote, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules of conduct, yes or no, unquote. Dr. McGill gave a nuanced response. Quote, if the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment. And, quote, it is a context-dependent decision, unquote. The Congresswoman then asked Presidents Gay and Kornbluth a similar question and got similar answers. Dr. Kornbluth said, quote, I have not heard calling for the genocide of Jews on a campus, unquote, to which Representative Stefanik replied, but you have heard chants for intifada, unquote. Dr. Kornbluth responded, quote, I've heard chants that can be anti-Semitic depending on the context when calling for the elimination of the Jewish people, unquote. But context does matter. Prior to the exchange with President Gay of Harvard, Congresswoman Stefanik defined intifada as follows, quote, you understand that the use of the term intifada in the context of the Israeli-Arab conflict is indeed a call for violent armed resistance against the state of Israel, including violence against civilians and the genocide of Jews, unquote. Actually, that is not what intifada means in Arabic. It means shaking off. Even the slogans that student protesters chanted for a free Palestine from river to sea is not necessarily a call for genocide, especially when Netanyahu and his far-right members of his own party are in favor of a permanent occupation of the West Bank and Gaza rather than a two-state solution. The response to the testimony of the college presidents by some Democrats and Republicans, called for these presidents to resign. On December 9th, Penn's President McGill did resign under pressure by Penn alumni to withdraw financial support, and President Gay a few months later under accusations of not having proper citations on her doctoral dissertation. It is not a good idea for wealthy American Jews to use their influence to suppress free speech at universities or to dictate who should lead them. This only feeds the anti-Semitic trope that Jews control American politics with their money. In an interview on the television program 60 Minutes on October 16, 2023, President Biden said that it would be a mistake for Israel to reoccupy Gaza and there must be a path to establish a Palestinian state. But 2 days later, President Biden traveled to Tel Aviv. He had also planned to visit Amman, Jordan, to meet with Jordanian, Egyptian, and Palestinian leaders, but it was canceled by the Arab leaders. In Israel, Biden expressed support for Israel and for, quote, the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people, unquote, but he did not call for a ceasefire. On October 20, Biden asked Congress to approve $14.3 billion in additional aid, in addition to the $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel, and linked it to the $100 billion he asked for Ukraine, even though the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has nothing to do with the conflict in the Gaza Strip. President Biden expanded on his vision for a long-term peace in the Middle East on November 19th. Besides calling for the eventual establishment of a Palestinian state on the West Bank and Gaza, Biden foresaw an economic alliance linking India, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel with Europe. This was a reference to the so-called Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords were negotiated by Donald Trump's administration between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. The idea came from a meeting in September 2016 between Netanyahu and the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, with the then presidential candidate Trump, his son-in-law Jared Kushner, and his campaign executive Steve Bannon at Trump Tower in New York City. At the meeting, Netanyahu and Dermer proposed an alliance between Israel and the Gulf states, that is Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. After Trump's victory, the president of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed, met in December with Kushner, Bannon, and Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, at the Four Seasons Hotel in New York. At that meeting, bin Zayed suggested that Saudi Arabia might be willing to join in an alliance against Iran. As early as March 2016, Trump promised to move the American embassy to Jerusalem in a speech he delivered before the right-wing American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. After that speech, this Jewish-American casino billionaire, Sheldon Adelson, donated $20 million to a political action committee supporting Trump's campaign. As president-elect in December 2016, Trump named David M. Friedman, a bankruptcy lawyer and Orthodox Jew, to be his nominee as the ambassador to Israel. Friedman had questioned whether there should be a two-state solution to the Palestinian question and supported the settlement movement on the West Bank of the Jordan River. He compared American Jews in the so-called J Street lobby, who supported Israel but opposed the settlement movement, to capos, that is, the Jews who cooperated with the Nazis in the death camps. In January 2017, Trump named his son-in-law Jared Kushner, who is married to Trump's daughter Ivanka, to the post of senior advisor with the responsibility to negotiate a peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Jared is a modern Orthodox Jew whose father, Charles Kushner, was a real estate developer who had been convicted of tax evasion, illegal campaign contributions, and witness tampering by hiring a prostitute to compromise his brother-in-law who was cooperating with federal investigators. Kushner's father was a personal friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, who stayed at Kushner's home in Livingston, New Jersey, and knew Jared as a boy. Kushner mediated the signing of the Abraham Accords in September 2020 in Washington, D.C. As part of the agreement, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain recognized the State of Israel, which were the first Arab countries to recognize Israel since 1994, when Jordan signed a peace agreement with Israel. This was followed in December 2020 by the Israeli-Moroccan Normalization Agreement, in which Morocco recognized Israel's sovereignty in return for the United States recognizing Morocco's sovereignty over the Western Sahara. Then in January 2021, while Trump was still president, Israel signed the Abraham Accords with Sudan in Khartoum in return for the United States abolishing Sudan's status as a state sponsor of terrorism and providing a loan of $1.2 billion to retire the country's debts to the World Bank. The Abraham Accords were Netanyahu's attempt to divide the Arab world against Iran by taking advantage of the Sunni-Shi'ite Schism. The schism dates back to the 7th century A.D., after the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632. One group claimed that his successor should be Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law Ali. This group became known as, in Arabic, as the Shi'ite Ali, the followers of Ali, or simply Shia. Another group supported Muhammad's close friend, Abu Bakr, to become the first caliph, or leader, of the Muslim world. They became known as the Sunni, from the Arabic word sunnah, meaning tradition. The Persians, Iranians today, are Shia, but they are not Arabs. They speak Farsi, not Arabic. In Lebanon, there are Shiite Arabs, today associated with Hezbollah. The minority Alawite Arabs in Syria, including Syria's current president, Hafez al-Assad, are a splinter group from the Shiite Muslims. In Mesopotamia, Iraq today, most of the population are Shiite Arabs, but one quarter is Sunni Arabs, and the rest are Persians and Kurds, Kurds being the non-Arab Muslims ethnically close to the Persians. While Hamas are Sunni Muslims, their supporters include the Shiite states of Syria and Iran and Shiite militias in Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen. Mohammed bin Zayed, the Sunni crown prince of the city-state of Abu Dhabi, the most important of the 7 emirates of the United Arab Emirates, is a staunch ally of the United States, who have a U.S. military base on their territory and sent troops to assist American military efforts in Afghanistan. Bin Zayed played a key role in installing Mohammed bin Salman as the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. In January 2015, the Saudi king Abdullah bin Abdulaziz died. In the House of Saud, royal succession went not to the king's sons, but to his brothers. So Abdullah's brother Salman became king, and his last surviving brother, Muqin bin Abdulaziz, became crown prince, the next in succession. But King Solomon broke with tradition, removed Muqin from the line of succession, and elevated his nephew, Mohammed bin Nayef, as crown prince, and his own son, Mohammed bin Salman, as deputy crown prince. In May 2017, President Donald Trump visited Saudi Arabia and promised to sell the Saudis about $110 billion in arms. The money was used by the Saudis to fund the proxy war against the Shiite-affiliated Houthis in Yemen. Meanwhile, following this meeting, King Salman summoned bin Nayef to the royal palace and forced him to resign as crown prince in favor of bin Salman. Bin Salman presented himself as a reformer of the strict Wahhabi law in Saudi Arabia, but he began to arrest human rights activists, prominent journalists, and even some of the royal family on charges of corruption. He was also complicit in the death and dismemberment of Wall Street Journal reporter Jamal Khashoggi in October 2018 in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, Turkey. Donald Trump had conflicts of interest in his business ties with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. In 1995, the billionaire Saudi Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, along with others, invested $325 million in Trump's financially stricken Plaza Hotel in New York City. And in 2001, Trump sold the entire 45th floor of the Trump World Tower across from the United Nations for $20 million to the Saudis for their UN delegation. While Trump was president of the United States in February 2017, the Trump Organization, then run by his sons Eric and Donald Jr., opened a golf club in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. When Trump signed an executive order suspending the entry to the United States immigrants from 7 Muslim-majority countries, it did not include the United Arab Emirates nor Saudi Arabia. 6 months after Kushner left his position in the White House, he obtained a $2 billion loan from a sovereign wealth fund controlled by Crown Prince Salman of Saudi Arabia. Most recently, in an interview at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, Kushner said that Gaza has waterfront property that could be very valuable, unquote, and that the Palestinians should be moved out of Gaza to a secure area in the Negev desert while Israel, quote, cleans up the strip. In September 2021, Biden had promised to make Saudi Arabia a pariah nation for the killing of Khashoggi. But during a trip to Israel in July 2022, President Joe Biden stated that he strongly supported the Abraham Accords and he was going to fly to Saudi Arabia to meet with Mohammed bin Salman. At the meeting, the Saudi government agreed to allow flights between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain to fly over Saudi space. The Crown Prince made the demand that in exchange for Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel, the United States would have to sell Saudi Arabia more weapons and consent to Saudi Arabia obtaining enriched uranium for peaceful purposes. Biden was criticized for being photographed giving a fist bump to Mohammed bin Salman. But more important than that visual is the fact that Biden was considering allowing Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium. This is how both Israel and Iran started the development of nuclear bombs. In 1952, King Farouk of Egypt was overthrown by a group of army officers, including Gamal Abdel Nasser, and Nasser was elected president in 1956. Although Egyptians are Sunni Muslims, they are not ethnically Arabs. Nevertheless, Nasser led a movement that became known as Arab nationalism. He was also a socialist who ended the British protectorate over Egypt, and he nationalized the Suez Canal, banned Israel from using it, and blocked the Straits of Tiran at the mouth of the Red Sea, thereby blocking the Israeli port of Eilat at the southern tip of the Negev. Great Britain, France, and Israel then invaded Egypt and took control of the canal and the Sinai Peninsula. The following year, under pressure from the United States and the Soviet Union, Israel withdrew from the Sinai, and they were replaced by the United Nations Emergency Force, UNEF. When Eisenhower announced his Atoms for Peace initiative, Israel became the second country after Turkey to sign a peaceful nuclear cooperation agreement with the United States in July 1955. But after Egypt's President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal in July of 1956, the following September, France agreed with Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres to provide Israel with a nuclear reactor to be built near Dimona in the Negev desert. When the reactor arrived in Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Ben-Gurion declared it was to be used for power a pumping station to desalinate the seawater. President Kennedy attempted to have U.S. scientists inspect Dimona facilities annually, but it was resisted by Ben-Gurion and his successor Levi Eshkol. Kennedy's assassination in November 1963 put an end to these demands. Dwight Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program also allowed Iran to develop 2 uranium mines, a research reactor, and 3 uranium enrichment plants. This was after, in 1953, the CIA helped overturn the elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who had nationalized the Iranian oil industry. Iran ratified the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, subjecting its nuclear activities to the International Energy Agency, the IAEA. But after the Iranian Revolution in 1979 that overthrew the Shah of Iran, who had been put in place by the United States, Iran ceased cooperation with the IAEA and continued its nuclear program clandestinely. In 2013, a group of 6 countries, including the 5 permanent members of the United States UN Security Council plus Germany, met with Iran in Geneva, Switzerland, and agreed to a framework for freezing Iran's nuclear program in exchange for a decrease in sanctions. The following year, President Barack Obama unblocked $2.8 billion in frozen Iranian funds in exchange for Iran continuing to convert its stock of 20% enriched uranium into fuel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke out against the agreement. When, in 2009, the Obama administration began negotiations to limit Iran's nuclear program and suspend the sanctions, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates joined Israel in an attempt to block the deal. President Trump, once he became president, canceled the agreement in May 2018. In May 1967, Colonel Nasser ordered the United Nations Emergency Force out of Sinai, reoccupied it, and again closed the Straits of Tiran. Israel launched a number of preemptive strikes against Egyptian airfields and then took control of the Sinai, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights from Syria, which had entered the war as well, and the west bank of the Jordan River, as well as East Jerusalem from Jordan, which had a defensive pact with Egypt prior to the war. It is believed that Israel began a full-scale production of nuclear weapons following the 1967 Six-Day War, but has never acknowledged it has obtained nuclear weapons. After Israel took control of the West Bank, extreme right-wing Israelis began to establish settlements there. The Israelis claimed that it was not occupied territory, but originally the lands of Judea and Samaria in biblical times. The conservative Likud government of Menachem Begin in 1977 was supportive of the settlement movement, stating that no part of the West Bank should be handed over to foreign rule. Ariel Sharon, the same year, favored the plan to settle 2 million Jews on the West Bank by the year 2000. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 wanted the Palestinian Authority to be, quote, less than a state, unquote, quote, and for Israel to keep settlements beyond the Green Line, that is the border under the 1949 armistice agreements. In 1997, the Likud government of Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to keep 60% of the settlements in the West Bank, those particularly around East Jerusalem and the entire Jordan Valley as a security zone. In 2004, the International Court of Justice found that the Israeli settlements in the West Bank and Golan Heights were illegal under the Fourth Geneva Conventions that state, quote, the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies, unquote. The Israeli government provided funding for building roads between the West Bank settlements. The West Bank is divided into 3 areas. Area A comprises 18% of the West Bank, is under the control and security of the Palestinian Authority. It is made up entirely by Palestinian towns and cities, including Hebron, Nablus, Ramallah, Bethlehem, and some other small towns and villages. They are separated by an area controlled by Israeli checkpoints. Area B consists of 22% of the West Bank, is under Palestinian civil authority, but Israel remains control of the security. It consists primarily of small villages and farmlands. Area C comprises 60% of the West Bank, is under full Israeli civil administration and security control. 2 cities holy to the Jews and Christians are located in the West Bank. One is Hebron, the largest Palestinian on the West Bank, is where King David was called to relocate to be anointed the King of Israel. And the Jewish patriarch Abraham and his wife Sarah are buried there. Under the Hebron Protocol of 1997, the city was divided into 2 sectors. One, consisting of 80% of the city, is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, and the other, including the Old City, consisting of 20%, is under Israeli military administration. The second biblical city is Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. It too was within the kingdom of David in the hill country of Judea. But in 1995, Israeli troops withdrew from Bethlehem, and it came under the control of the Palestinian National Authority. During the Second Intifada, the Israeli Defense Forces besieged for 39 days the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, where Palestinian militants had taken refuge. Today, the city is separated from Israeli settlements on the West Bank by a barrier. In East Jerusalem, the Israeli government has embarked upon a policy of eviction of Palestinian families based on the argument that as many as a third of the 100 Palestinians in the city do not have permits. The United Nations Human Rights Office cautioned Israel that such evictions could constitute war crimes. And the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimates that at least 180 Palestinian houses in East Jerusalem have had eviction cases filed against them. President Biden ignored these festering situations on the West Bank and Gaza and concentrated instead on withdrawing American troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, supporting Ukrainians against the Russian invasion, and countering Chinese incursions in the West China Sea, in the South China Sea. But even more problematic, he endorsed the Trump-Netanyahu-Abraham Accords that sought to create an alliance of the Sunni nations, including Saudi Arabia, against the Shi'ite coalition of Iran and its proxies. This was part of Netanyahu's master plan to divide the Arab nations at the expense of the Palestinians. The result was October 7th, 2023. Netanyahu's stated aim is to destroy Hamas, but he has also stated he is opposed to the return of the Palestinian Authority to Gaza. He stated that it is, quote, a civil government authorized that educates its children to hate Israelis and kill Israelis, eliminate the state of Israel, an authority that pays families of murderers based on the number they murdered, and authorities whose leaders have not condemned the terrible massacre on October 7th. Instead, he says he wants to demilitarize Gaza, which probably means that Israel will militarily occupy Gaza. Israel must withdraw all its troops from Gaza and the West Bank, and its settlers from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. There needs to be a provisional self-governing Palestinian state, but its borders cannot be policed by Israel. That would only constitute the continuation of the present-day occupation. There is a need for an international military force, probably under NATO, because the current policies of Israel not only threaten the security of the United States, but also the security of Europe by alienating the entire Muslim world. Israel cannot consider itself a democracy when it has an established religion, second-class citizenship for Palestinian Israelis, and no rights at all for the Palestinians in the occupied territories. It makes no sense for the Biden administration to send arms to a country that does not share the ultimate goal of a two-state solution. And if Israel continues its policy of apartheid in the West Bank and ethnic cleansing in Gaza, the United States should consider imposing sanctions upon Israel. Jerusalem should become an international city, as recommended by the United Nations back in 1947, with holy sites administered by independent Jewish, Muslim, and Christian authorities. The United States should also offer to withdraw sanctions against Iran in exchange for its stopping its nuclear weapons program and possibly imposing sanctions upon Israel unless it does the same. In fact, the two-state solution is probably not a long-term solution to the problem. No state has survived after being divided into two parts separated by another state. It did not work after World War I, when the Weimar Republic and Prussia were separated by the Polish corridor, nor after World War II, when the British left India and East Pakistan, that is Bangladesh today, divided by the separate country of India. That is why the ultimate aim should be the establishment of a singular secular state of Israel that is a homeland to both Palestinians and Jews. Israeli security requires that the state extend from the Jordan River and to the Mediterranean, and any Palestinian state divided into two sections is unsustainable. The matter of the return of displaced Palestinians would have to be settled by Israel compensating Palestinians for their lost property. Eventually, the Palestinians might become a majority of the population in such a binational state, but the Jewish population should be protected with minority rights and possibly an arrangement similar to that in Belgium, in which half the seats of the parliament are reserved to the French-speaking population and another half to the Flemish speakers. I am not the first to argue for a singular secular state of Israel that is a homeland to both Jews and Arabs. Judah Leon Magnus, the founding chancellor of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1925, favored a binational Israel. So has the Austrian-Israeli philosopher Martin Buber, and more recently, the Anglo-Jewish historian Tony Judd and the Palestinian-American literary scholar Edward Said. But this may take a generation or more to achieve only after the hatreds on both sides have subsided. To hear about terrorism in the Holy Land, go to Biden's Misguided Middle East Policy, Part 2.